Good morning, everyone. My name's Patrick Williams. I'm one of the pastoral staff here at Foster, and we have a very exciting thing taking place for us today. Paula and Reese White are joining our church by profession of faith today. So what I thought I would do is just have Paula and Reese stand up right now in the congregation. Just have them stand up and introduce them. Paula and Reese. Paula and Reese. They're not, they're greeting. Well, let's just go out there and meet them right now. You guys I really thought they were in here, didn't you? I knew they were out there. So here are Paula and Reese right here. We are so glad that they're joining the church. Paula and Reese, what are you doing in the lobby?
Well, we're greeting, welcoming people.
So you already have a ministry. Reese, that's the only thing you do here at Foster?
Well, sometimes I help out on Tuesday with community service, and that's a blessing to me and the people I work with.
So here are two people who are joining the church today by profession of faith who are already involved in ministry at the church. So that's a strong encouragement to those of us who have been here for years and haven't found our ministry. Let's get involved, huh? Let's get involved. Let's give Paula and Reese a welcome, a good round of applause. We're so glad that you're here. God bless.
In Proverbs 13:22, it says, "A good man gives an inheritance to his grandson." Other versions say, "A good man gives an inheritance to his children." I thought about that, and I thought to myself, how is it if we listen to our government right now? It said 99% of us will not have anything to give to our kids, much less our grandkids. And what I've seen where people have given money or possessions to children that was not earned, it doesn't always work well either. So I said, well, there must be something else to this other than practical kinds of objects. And finally the thought came through me that it's character. It's character that you send from one generation to the next generation and to the next. And you can even be born into a family that does not have good character, but you can change character. It's not like your genetic makeup. It's something that we can do something with. And so the more I thought about that, the more I realized that so much has happened to me in my life that I had no control over. It just began to happen because with character, it goes generation after generation. And if you'll permit me, I'd just like to go back to my family. My grandparents on my mother's side were farmers in Kansas and found the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And so they decided they would move to Loma Linda and La Sierra, California, go to church there, go to school there, and raise their 4 children to be involved in the medical missionary, mission, I should say. My grandparents from my dad's side did the same thing from Colorado. And so we ended up with a whole generation of people who were medical missionaries. And what was really terrific about this is that they spent a lot of their time in Africa and India, built hospitals all over. I have an aunt who actually helped found Malamula Mission, which was the first leper colony in Africa. It was a great thing to have. Well, those characteristics, both the medical part and the mission part, were passed on to the next generation, which was mine. And then from there on to my kids. And finally, I got a call and I'm keeping this in 5 minutes, so. I got a call from my grandson who said, "Grandpa," he says, "there's some chance you could get me into La Sierra." And I said, "Well, there is, yes." He said, "Because I've decided I want to become a medical missionary. After 5 generations, there's something in there for that." Well, let me tell you, it's even better because he's an extraordinary race car driver and just been offered for a whole season by Lamborghini to race in Europe. He gave all that up, and he just finished his first week at La Sierra moving forward. So the things that happen with fathers and mothers to be able to give to our kids character is really important. So what I wanted to do is to read some things that I have done for my children. I'm trying to figure out how is it that I take the experience that I have in life and and pass that on in some form to my children where it can build on their character. And I've been doing this for about 35 years or so. So I have one, of course, for Father's Day. It's called The Perfect Father. A father is a quiet security who insists on your growth rather than his own. For if he demands of his children that they become his followers, then they will not become their children's leaders. And if you kind of think through some of that, I see lots of fathers that gently, in this church, that gently bring their children into an understanding of things that build their character. The second one, my mama told me that never leave out the mamas. So I have one for mothers too. And it goes like this. It is with awe that I consider a mother's nurture and protection of her young, born and unborn. It is with pain that I observe a mother's requirement to relinquish eventual control of her offspring. But a mother's ultimate responsibility is to cheer from the stadia of life, as her beloved carried their burdens through the fields of sorrow and pain. For a child forever coddled is a child forever crippled, while a child forever cheered and encouraged is a child forever strong. And one last one, because I know there are many in here who do not have kids, and so there has to be one for you too. I would have to say that I got most of this one from the inner city of Houston, but it's entitled, Do You See What I See? Did you know that young boy could become a king? For you see, you couldn't possibly know what combination of genes, what heritage lies waiting to spring to life. Did you know that young girl could become a queen? For you see, you couldn't possibly know what arrangement of parents, siblings, grandparents, and friends will nurture her to greatness. Did you know that young lad could become a prime minister? Please understand, you couldn't possibly know that his heart is accepting, loving, and teachable. Did you know that young lass could become a president? Please understand, you couldn't possibly know God has a plan, a future of greatness for every young child on this earth. Did you know that every dear being, young or old, black or white, rich or poor, free or enslaved, is waiting for your encouragement, your belief, your support? For you see, extraordinary accomplishment may be only one hug away. Thank you.
Some things just aren't about us. It's something that's a little hard for me to understand sometimes. I like things to be about me. Have you ever been to a wedding? Been a part of a wedding? I used to be really involved in weddings a lot. I still am involved in weddings sometimes more than I want to be. But I used to set up weddings and help get weddings looking the way that a bride wanted the wedding to look. And I would do lots of different parts of the wedding. I would do design the invitations, design the save the dates, help there be a website. There's a lot more in a wedding now than there used to be. It's not just nuts and mints anymore, people. You have a website and everything. So you have all these things, right, that you have to have for this wedding. And guess who it's about? You know who it's about. It's about the bride. Sometimes the mother of the bride gets confused, and that's okay. Sometimes I've worked with a lot of brides and a lot of mothers of the bride. Sometimes the mother of the bride gets a little confused and thinks it's her chance to have the wedding that she always dreamed of. But it's really not about even the mother of the bride. It's about the bride. It's definitely not about the groom. That's clear throughout the whole process that it's not about the groom. When I got married, a lot of it was about me somehow because my wife was still asking my opinion on all these things because I did do weddings before. But it's not really about you. Even the parts that the mother-in-law gets to plan and even the parts that the groom gets to plan, usually that's dictated by who? The bride. The bride's still ultimately in charge. I'm sorry, it's not about you, has been said so many times from the wedding planner's mouth to the mother of the bride or the groom of the bride. I'm sorry, it's not about you. We weren't asking you, we were asking the bride what she wants. It happens so much. I used to run camps. I love camp. I think camp is wonderful. And I used to run camps and be the director of a camp. And I would be planning these things with my staff. And staff would try these things. And I was very willing to let the staff take control over the things that they could have control over. I don't like to micromanage things. And so I let them come up with their own creative ideas. But when something wasn't working, we had to have a meeting. We had to have a come to Jesus moment. And so there was times where something wasn't working, and I saw them trying this thing week after week at camp, and I saw it failing week after week at camp. And how did I determine the failure of their idea? It was whether the kids liked it or not. Camp is not like school, okay? Camp, you're paying to have fun. And if the kid doesn't like their experience, then we have failed the camper, right? So I would sit my staff down and say, guys, why do we keep doing this? The campers just don't like it. Well, the campers just don't understand. If they would just be quiet, they would do that. And if it would just be like, all the blame was put on the camper. And I said, I'm sorry, staff, but camp is not about you. Camp is not about you. Camp, you are paid to work for the kids. Camp is about the kids and their success. There's times when things just aren't about us. There's a story in the Bible in John 4 about the Samaritan woman at the well. And Jesus goes and finds her at the well and asks her, can I have a drink? And this woman all of a sudden just is like, this doesn't make any sense. You're a Jew, I'm a Samaritan. You shouldn't even be talking to me. What is going on here? Why are you asking me for a drink? This doesn't make any sense. And you can read the story later. It goes on, and Jesus is trying to tell this woman about the possibility of having water where she won't thirst anymore. This living water that she won't have to thirst anymore. And Jesus is trying to explain this to the woman, and the woman's just like, finally just kind of like, okay, that sounds good. So tell me, where do I get this water so I don't have to come back to this well? And Jesus is like, look, go get your husband, and we'll all talk about this. And she's like, well, I don't have a husband. And he's like, you're right, you don't have a husband. You actually have been married 5 times, and the man you're with right now isn't your husband. And the woman's like, all right. So you know something. And she starts to say, you must be a prophet. Because that's the only way you would know this. You must be a prophet. And it doesn't really tell maybe all the things that she said in that moment, because I think it was kind of a shocking moment for her. But it does say that when she realizes that this man must have some power, this man must be a prophet of some sort, she decides to clear up something that has been bothering her for a long time. And she says, okay, so if you are a prophet, let's get down to it. My people, the Samaritans, say we must worship on this mountain right here. But you Jews say that we have to worship in Jerusalem. Which is it? And I can just imagine Jesus is sitting there going, I just told you all these things about your life, and you want to know whether it's right to worship on this mountain or whether we're supposed to be worshiping in Jerusalem like the Jews. It kind of seems like a random thought from this woman that's just been called out, has just been told, I know what kind of life you are leading, and she automatically jumps to this point. And then Jesus says something really interesting. He starts to just talk about this worship issue. And he eventually says, it's not going to matter soon what you call yourselves. He says, a time is coming, and has in fact come, when what you are called will not matter, and where you go to worship will not matter. It'll be who you are that counts before God. It'll be who you are and the way that you live that counts before Him. Your worship must engage the Spirit in the pursuit of truth. That's the kind of people the Father is out looking for. Those who are simply and honestly themselves before Him in their worship. Those who worship Him and do it out of their very being, their very spirit, their true selves in adoration. This woman then says, I don't know about that. That's her response to what he just said. I don't know about that. But I do know that the Messiah is coming, and when he arrives, we'll get the whole story. And Jesus says, I am here. He says, I am here. Don't have to wait any longer or look any further. I am here. And I think all of a sudden, we don't really know the rest of that story completely, but I think all of a sudden it hits her like a truck. I mean, it just hits her. That what he was saying was, it doesn't really matter. Samaritans say we need to worship on this mountain, and the Jews say we must worship in Jerusalem. And Jesus is saying that a time is coming and yet has already come where it's not going to matter whether you call yourself Samaritan or Jew, on whether you worship on this mountain or in Jerusalem. If all that you're doing is trying to worship in the way that you want to worship. It matters that our worshipers are worshiping in spirit and in truth, in harmony with the nature and will of God. That's the kind of worshipers that God is looking for. Jesus is saying to this woman, worship isn't about you, it's about me. Some things just aren't about us. It's a hard lesson to learn. I'm watching my son learn it right now. Paxton has a hard time believing that things just aren't about him. And the thing is I'm just now learning it myself through watching him. It's like, yes, sometimes even I have to think about you before I think about me now. So you're teaching me the same lesson I'm trying to teach you. When I want just 30 more minutes of sleep, right? And you're screaming bloody murder, and I know it's probably nothing, but then you think about it and you're like, what if this is the time that his hand's through the thing and he snapped his wrist? What if this is I know it's gonna be me that's watching when it's that instance that I didn't go and check because I thought he was fine. So I have to get up and realize it's not all about me. And there's so many times where Paxton has to realize it's not all about him, even though his world is all about him right now. He can't even rationalize those thoughts. When we treat worship as something that is about us, we practice idolatry. And I know that sounds like a big thing, but it's the truth. And I don't think that it happens necessarily out of poor intent. And I don't think that it's necessarily a malicious move or even a conscious decision to do something that's focused on ourselves. But I think subconsciously, some weeks I come to church and I want the message to speak to my heart and to speak to my situation. And I know subconsciously, a lot of times I go to a worship experience and I worship better when I like the song, or it's a song that speaks to my situation, or it's one of my favorites. I know that I'm guilty of that so many times when I come in and I'm expecting something that's for me, and that I can walk away and say, I felt a blessing from God today, I don't think that those come from bad points of view or it's even an evil place that you're coming to do that. However, if I make worship about me in any way, then it's idolatry. It's practicing idolatry. Worship isn't about us. It isn't even our idea. And we can't even do it without the creator of it. Worship was created by God and for God, and we were created by God and for God to worship him. So when we make it about us in any way, it stops being true worship. Worship is our eternal activity. It's the activity that's going to carry over from this life to the next. It's our eternal activity, and we get the privilege of practicing it now here on this earth. That's a privilege because it's what we're going to get to do forever in eternity with him. It's our eternal practice. Isaiah 43:21 says, "This people I have created for myself, that they may proclaim my praise." He created us for him to praise him. He created us for this worship. So if I'm not growing as a worshiper, then I'm not in line with what God is seeking to do in my life. If I don't seek to grow in worship personally, then I'm not really in line with what God is seeking to do in my life. And if we as a church are not growing together as worshipers, as a worshiping church, then we're not in line with what God is seeking to do in this body. Why do you come to church? Why do we come here? If it's for us to get something out of the church service, then we have the wrong focus. We're also to seek others, worship for others. If we are not seeking to help others locally and globally become worshipers, then we are not in line with God's purposes. John Piper wrote this. He's a theologian, and he wrote, Missions is not the ultimate goal of the church. We think of missions getting outside, not just outside of the country, not just global missions, but even our local missions. We think of mission as maybe the goal of the church. He says, missions is not the ultimate goal of the church. Worship is. Missions exist because worship does not. That's not saying that worship doesn't happen anywhere. He's saying that when worship doesn't exist in a community, that's when they need missions. They need missions so that they can have worship eventually, right? Missions exist because worship doesn't. Worship is ultimate, not missions, because God is ultimate, not man. John Piper's words are very true for global missions, but they're also very true for the lost in Asheville and us possibly reaching them. Our aim is not to just meet sinners and tell them about Jesus. It's also to transform sinners into worshipers, to help them see that that's what God has called us to do. That was Jesus' aim for this Samaritan woman, this sinful Samaritan woman. That's what he wanted to do with her. Louis Giglio put it this way: we were created to worship, so you're going to do that no matter what. But you can worship whatever you want. However, remember, whatever you worship, you become obsessed with. Whatever you become obsessed with, you imitate. And whatever you imitate, you become. So, in essence, ultimately, whatever you value most ultimately determines who you are. We become what we worship. So if you don't like what you're becoming, take a quick inventory as to what you have on the throne of your heart. If you want to become more like Jesus, then focus your worship squarely on him. Worship is a whole life response to God's greatness and glory. A whole life response to God's greatness and glory. Not a some life response, not a weekly response, not even a daily response, but a whole life response to God's greatness and glory because he deserves it so much. I've grown up in the church. Literally, I think I grew up inside of a church. Not just on Saturdays. I was at church Monday through Friday and sometimes on Sunday. I was at the church a lot. I grew up there participating in weekly events and weekend events with my dad being a pastor. But I also remember loving the church greatly, but also remember a lot of times where we had to, as a family, intentionally get together and decide we were going to get over talking about how things went, watching the service as critically as we possibly could, worrying about who is going to mess up or who is going to wear what, and intentionally think about how we were going to be able to actually worship on Sabbath mornings. Because at a very young, early age, I got used to the habit of watching things with a very critical eye and forgetting about who I was worshiping and thinking about the components that made up that worship service. And I walked away many Sabbaths getting in the car saying, why was this way? Why was this way? Who was doing this? Why were they wearing that? Because I got used to thinking about it from a critical standpoint. I recently spoke at a youth rally, and I was so encouraged at this youth rally and also so discouraged at this youth rally because I got there and I wanted to be early. So I got there 45 minutes early, which is still not that early, and nothing was happening yet. They were just getting in the space, and no AV was set up. And there was nothing, no lights were set up, and nobody was practicing any instruments. And I thought to myself, something should be happening by now. And we got down to 30 minutes, still nothing. 15 minutes, they start bringing in sound equipment. They start setting it all up. AV was a mess. Audiovisual was it was just a mess. Nothing worked. Everything was squealing. The projector wouldn't respond to the computer, and the mics were squealing. The guitars weren't working. Everything was a mess. I tested my mic. It sounded like I was in a bathroom, and it was squealing all over the place, and they were like, it sounds good, And I'm just like, this is ridiculous. And everything just was going wrong. And they start the service, and I'm sitting there trying to sing on the front row, and I'm trying to prepare my heart for worship so that I can maybe deliver a message that will mean something. And so I'm trying to sing these songs, and every song, 2 words of every line is cut off the screen because they didn't have it formatted so that all the words are on the screen. So everyone's just kind of singing most of it and then kind of guessing at the last 2 words, hoping that they get those right. And we're all just singing along, and I'm just sitting there going, there's not one person in this room that can make this happen better than it's happening right now. And I'm getting discouraged, and my mind's going all over the place. And all of a sudden, I look to my immediate right, and there's a man, a youth that's sitting next to me. And he's probably 15 years old, and he's extremely mentally challenged. And he has both of his hands raised up to God, and he's the only one in the whole auditorium that has his hands raised. And everyone else is probably thinking a little bit like I'm thinking, like, where are the last 2 words, and why is this going the way that it's going? And he's sitting there with his hands up, his eyes closed, and I don't know if he knew the words or not, but he was singing louder than I had ever heard anyone singing. He was singing so loud in my ear that I had to look to my right. And I realized that this guy didn't care what the worship was, what the practice had done, whether they had set up the AV right or whether the words were right on the screen. Because he had a relationship with God that was bigger than that. And with his hands raised, he was belting out words to Jesus and worshiping in a way that I had never really seen before. And all of a sudden, my heart was humbled, and I said, I don't care if my mic squeals. If this guy can sit there with all the things that he has in his life that he could so easily get angry at God for, with challenge after challenge that he's going to be facing for the rest of his life, he's able to worship a God that made him because he knows that God is ultimately going to make him new again someday. It was an incredible experience. That's the kind of worship that I want to be able to do. And I can admit from this pulpit, this stage, that it's hard for me to do that sometimes. It's hard for me to sometimes look past things that I very easily get distracted with. But God asked us for us to worship him in spirit and in truth. And to me, that's just offering all of ourselves, all of our broken selves to God. Not just here in church, but throughout the week as well. It's important. It's what we were created to do. So I'm going to invite you for just the next 2 minutes. It's not very long. There's blue sheets, bluish colored sheets on your chairs. And there should be some pencils around in some of the backs of the chairs. And you don't have to feel like you have to fill this out, but I just feel like sometimes God wants to say something to us in worship. And so instead of me filling the next few minutes, I want God to be able to speak to your heart. Maybe he's talking to you about something about worship. Maybe he's talking to you about something totally different. But I want you to just be able to reflect. That's why there's a part that just says notes. Maybe this isn't what you need to reflect on. But just allow yourself the next 2 minutes as they play music to just listen to what God is maybe saying to your heart.